3 days after leaving Angoon, we rounded Point Gardner. We were out of Chatham Strait at last. We had begun to feel like prisoners of the strait, and it was good to see its wide mouth close behind us. Our fatigue, after our all-night paddle, had allowed various illnesses to catch up with us, and we both had fevers. We decided to recuperate at a place called Tyee, where the chart showed an abandoned cannery that was once used by whalers.
Ouch.
We moored to some bushes below a row of small cabins.
One cabin back. Who knows whether this one was the
One of the cabins had apparently been used as a slaughterhouse by Indian hunters, for the floor was covered a foot deep in deer bones. We walked over to the cannery buildings, where big iron engines and flywheels and pulleys rusted in place. I found these artifacts especially interesting after Torch Bay and its absence of human things. But Tyee made George uneasy. As we prepared for sleep, George told me how sick he had been after our paddle past Angoon. For 2 nights he had sweated in his bag, so sick that he couldn't talk, while thoughts about dying in the wilderness crowded in. The next morning, George was anxious to leave. He had not slept well, he said. He had been kept awake by someone hammering in the forest, someone supernatural. It was a spirit, George said. These places hold them. As we got up to leave, George added his message to a wall already filled with the graffiti of passing hunters.
I can hardly remember. Ken remembers better than me because he took notes.
Didn't hunt, didn't kill, came here and sat still. Dyson, 1974.
The days became indistinguishable. We pressed on south, and the straits and channels gave way to more straits and channels. In the end, these became indistinguishable too. Going to shore only to sleep, we pushed off in the mornings upon waking. Not a day passed without whales. The sound of their blowing was always around us, like the respiration of gods. We were like small boys who have sneaked into Neptune's room and hear him breathing in his sleep. Approaching Kuyu Island, we saw the patchwork pattern of clear-cutting in the forest. I don't like logging, George said, but it sure makes you feel at home. We smelled sawdust and gasoline. Our noses, fine-tuned after several unpolluted months in the wilderness, could detect 1 or 2 parts per billion. It's good to smell logging smells again, George called back to me. George's passion for the South was all-consuming. I did not share it. I wanted to explore the forest behind our beaches, or occasionally climb one of the peaks above us. George always had a reason we should not. There was always a tide we had to catch, or a bit of good weather we ought to take advantage of. I was no match for George's drive southward. I played Starbuck to his Ahab, muttering a lot, but unable to deflect him. For George, the journey itself was the destination. In Ketchikan, the first real city we passed, I jumped ship. Ken's journey ended in Ketchikan, But George continued on alone until he reached Hansen Island. A year later, through Ken's invitation, George and Freeman were reunited after 7 years of estrangement. On August 30th, 1985, we too ended our journey at Hansen Island.
Really, mate? Ken?
Yeah.
I should introduce you to Helena, whom you haven't met.
Oh, hi.
Hi, Ken.
Helena Simons, Ken Brock, and you know Yashi.
Yes, I know, but
Some time ago.
10 years had passed since Ken's last visit. Dr. Spong's son Yashi had grown from a small child to a young man of 15. The great sea monster Mount Fairweather returns once again to open water.
And away! Fire the retros! Shifts to the back. Let out!
George calls it a necessary monster. Without it, he never would have achieved the sleek elegance of his later kayaks. But in the end, it was just too big, and had spent the last 11 years in landlocked dormancy.
There's champagne. Okay, now you can let it down. Yeah. Great. Great.